And in terms of the structures, I mean, this has always been a fascinating question of what is on the moon, glass structures, things like this, an alien base on the dark side of the moon. You know, based on the research you've done, the evidence, what do you suppose? I'll start with Darcy. You know, what do you suppose is up there?
Well, we go over some of the testimony from Carl Wolf in the series, who was essentially a photographic printer repairman at the time. Like, let's say, you know, the best Xerox printer of the time, but for an NSA facility that was working in collaboration with the space missions, beaming back the lunar orbiter, the reconnaissance LRO, lunar reconnaissance orbiter, photos into the facility, printing them off, creating these mosaics so they could fully map the lunar surface of the moon, all the craters, points of interest for later moon missions, and of course, landing the Apollo 11 mission. And Carl Wolf's testimony starts with saying, you know, I thought I was just going in to do a routine job to repair this malfunctioning technology. And everybody I met there when I got this upgraded security clearance to walk in was of bewilderment. People were concerned because they were seeing what looked like bases, structures that were on the far side of the moon that had, you know, large towers, big wear-shaped rectangular structures, kind of like buildings, as well as, you know, football field sized dish shaped objects, as if there was like some kind of communication effort by somebody on the moon. And those, you know, pictures never came to life. They never came to the public. And Carl Wolf was interviewed for Stephen Greer's Serious Disclosure Project back in the early 2000s. Carl Wolf is dead now. He got hit by a car when he was on his bike, and we can't really further get information from him on that. I think it's kind of sad that we're going through this disclosure process in Congress right now with Arrow, and you know, NASA's actually interested in the public with their new UAP research group with 16 board members. I mean, all these amazing things happening in the public, and this individual is not around to give testimony on, you know, the things that happened with his experience during his Air Force work back in the early 1960s. If he was being interviewed by Arrow, I would have loved that, because then we would have had this sort of NASA cover-up link to space anomalies, right? And it's part of the UAP UFO mystery. But then you go to these later missions, Apollo 8, Apollo 9, Apollo 10, where the capsule is literally just revolving around the moon, and the astronauts are actively taking DAC motion picture footage. They're taking it would have been at that point, Hasselblad SLR still images. And when they're not taking that stuff, and we haven't looked at that and sort of deconstructed some anomalies in the documentary, they're also speaking on the recorded channel from this telemetry and voice recorder box, which is kind of like a black box flight recorder that we would have on commercial flights here in current times, that records what the pilots are seeing, what the astronauts are seeing. And whenever they went on the far side of the moon, they report seeing lights down on the lunar surface, triangular shaped, you know, pyramidal shaped mounds, what looks like smoke being emitted from certain craters, bizarre things like noises, music, in other words, that was emanating only when they revolved around the far side of the moon. We started hearing about these things starting in Apollo 8, happening in Apollo 9. Apollo 10, the music comes back. There's a deep conversation that was recovered from the declassified transcripts from the DSEA flight recorder box. And, you know, if it was nothing, why would these astronauts be pointing these things out and talking about it?
In terms of the mystery of the moon, Mike, I mean, you've been doing this research for decades now. I'd love to know what you think is really going on up there. Is it a soul? They call it like a soul trap. I think John Lear talks about. Basically, is this how the aliens monitor Earth from the moon?
Yeah, thanks for pointing out it's been decades, Stone. I appreciate that. It has been a long time, and there's a lot of information. And you know that the whole it's a soul trap thing. That's pretty far-fetched stuff. I think, you know, for me, I want to stay in the grounded aspects of it. I want to stay in what can we look at the pictures and see that looks like construction, that looks like military bases, or looks like even extraterrestrial technology. And there's a lot of that on these pictures. I mean, they, again, like Darcy pointed out, they took film, all of which we have not seen. They took thousands and thousands of photographs, not all of which we've seen or studied. And, you know, then you have the problem of the photographs that we do have don't match up to the 8x10 glossy prints that they distributed around NASA at the time. In other words, you get a picture from somebody's closet that's been underneath their, underneath their stairs in a photo album for 40 years. And it's got stuff all over it. It's got pyramids and antennas. And I'm not kidding, flying saucers in a bunker up carved into a mountain on a hill on the dark side or the back side of the moon. And then you get the digital version of that, and all that stuff's erased. So you can't really trust the Internet archives. But even in the ones that are on the web, there is things that slip through the cracks. There's all kinds of weird stuff on there. So it looks like you have these glass structures or crystalline structures that were some sort of meteor shield to protect the bases that are down below. I mean, I've got pictures of edge-on glass domes over craters that are quite extraordinary to look at that I've seen. And then you have these buildings and towers and just stuff everywhere. And it looks like different epochs of development. In other words, you've got somebody that was there millions of years ago, somebody that was there a couple 100,000 years ago, and somebody that might have been there last week. And you really don't see too much of the latter. But I think a lot of that's probably in the secret stuff. It's in the stuff that's been hidden from us. And, you know, is some of it ours? Probably. But a lot of it, most of it seems to be from some other era, some other time when people were on the moon. And if you were engaged in a project on this planet, on Earth, the moon would be the perfect place from which to observe the development and conduct business, you know? So I think it makes a lot of sense as a staging area for a big program of some kind on the Earth. And it adds up to the way our evolution has worked, right? I mean, evolution is BS, right? This whole thing that we evolved from a salamander to an ape to us. I don't buy that for a second, because if you look at the fossil record, what you see really clearly is that species just spring into existence, fully formed, like you and me, modern man, and they last about 1 million years, and then they get wiped out in some sort of cataclysm. And, you know, it's almost as if somebody looks at this planet and says, oh, this is a pretty good place for life, and let's dump a bunch of life on this planet and see what happens over the next couple 100,000 years. And the moon is the perfect staging area for observation stations and stuff like that. And so I do think we do have all that stuff visible in some of these images, even though we're probably getting 5% of what's really there, especially if you believe, you know, a Carl Wolf story. And let me guess, Darcy, he was hit by a car that came out of a NASA park and ride, right?